Where to go on the first day of the tribulation? Jesus warned us. There's a specific instruction Jesus gave his followers that could mean the difference between life and death when the tribulation begins. But here's what will shock you. Less than 5% of Christians today know what this instruction is. You will be shocked when you find the 7 discoveries about the beginning of the tribulation. Discovery 1. The first day of the tribulation. The abomination of desolation returns. Jesus spoke of a great desolation that would mark the beginning of the worst period in human history. Daniel 9 also describes it. Discovery 2. Where do you flee? Revelation 12 tells us. But here's the question that could literally save your life. When Jesus said, "Flee to the mountains," which mountains? When he said, "Run," where exactly are you supposed to run to? This isn't an academic question. This isn't theological speculation. If you find yourself facing the abomination of desolation, knowing the wrong location could mean the difference between supernatural protection and certain death. The answer has been hidden in Revelation 12 for nearly 2,000 years, waiting for the generation that would need it. Revelation 12:6 gives us the first clue. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. The woman represents Israel, specifically the believing remnant of Israel, who will recognize the Antichrist's deception and flee his persecution. But the principle applies to all believers who find themselves in the tribulation. Notice 3 crucial details that will determine your survival. First, a place prepared by God. This isn't just any wilderness location. This isn't a general instruction to head for rural areas or find a cave somewhere. God has prepared a specific place, chosen in advance, equipped for what's coming. Second, they should feed her there. This isn't just about finding a place to hide. It's about finding a place where God will supernaturally provide food, water, and everything needed for survival. Just like he fed Israel in the Sinai wilderness for 40 years. Third, 1,260 days. Exactly 3.5 years. Half of the 7-year tribulation period. This wilderness refuge isn't a temporary hideout. It's a long-term sanctuary for the entire second half of the tribulation. But here's what's going to blow your mind. God may have been preparing this place for thousands of years. Has God already prepared a physical place, waiting in silence for this moment? The wilderness in biblical prophecy isn't just symbolic, it's geographical. When God told Israel to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, he didn't mean they should develop a wilderness mentality. He meant they should literally live in the physical wilderness between Egypt and the Promised Land. When Elijah fled to the wilderness, he didn't go to a spiritual state of mind. He went to the actual desert, where God fed him through ravens and sustained him by a brook. When David was fleeing from Saul, he didn't retreat into emotional isolation. He hid in literal caves in the physical wilderness of Judea. The pattern is consistent. When God says wilderness, he means actual wilderness. But what does wilderness mean in the context of the end times? Let's look at the geographical and spiritual characteristics. Geographically, a place that's isolated from major population centers, difficult to access by conventional military forces, naturally defensible, with water sources and potential for sustainable living. Spiritually, a place of testing, refining, and complete dependence on God, where human systems fail and divine provision becomes essential for survival. Strategically, a location outside the Antichrist's immediate sphere of control, beyond the reach of his surveillance systems, away from the economic infrastructure that will require the mark of the beast. Prophetically, a place that's specifically mentioned or alluded to in biblical prophecy as a refuge for God's people during the final persecution. Now, here's where this gets absolutely fascinating. Multiple Old Testament prophecies may be pointing to the same geographical location. Daniel 11:41 describes the Antichrist's military campaigns. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. 3 territories that will escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and Ammon. These are regions in modern-day Jordan, east of the Dead Sea, in mountainous wilderness terrain. While the Antichrist conquers most of the Middle East, these specific areas remain outside his control. Why would God preserve these particular territories from the Antichrist's conquest unless they serve a specific purpose in his plan? Isaiah 16:1-4 gives us another clue. Send the Lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah to the wilderness, to the mount of the daughter of Zion. Let my outcasts dwell with you, O Moab. Be a shelter to them from the face of the spoiler. From Selah to the wilderness. Selah means rock in Hebrew, and many scholars believe this refers to the rock city we now call Petra. Be a shelter to them from the face of the spoiler. The spoiler is the Antichrist, and this passage specifically commands the region to provide shelter for God's people fleeing from him. But here's the most stunning detail. Revelation 12:14 tells us exactly how this escape will happen. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times, and half a time, from the presence of the serpent. 2 wings of a great eagle. This imagery isn't random. Exodus 19:4. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. When Israel was trapped in Egypt with Pharaoh's army pursuing them, God didn't just give them directions to walk to safety. He supernaturally transported them through the Red Sea on dry ground. He provided a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night to guide them. He made their shoes not wear out during 40 years of wilderness wandering. God doesn't just provide escape routes, He provides miraculous transportation and supernatural guidance. So when Revelation 12:14 says the woman will be given wings of a great eagle to fly to her place in the wilderness, it's describing divine intervention on a scale that will make the Exodus look small by comparison. Whether this means literal flight, supernatural speed, or divinely orchestrated transportation, the message is clear. God will personally ensure His people reach the prepared place. But here's what should give you chills. This isn't just about Israel. Revelation 12:17 makes it clear that Satan's fury extends beyond the Jewish remnant. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. The rest of her offspring, Gentile believers who find themselves in the tribulation, will also be targets of Satan's persecution. Think about the logistics. If millions of people from around the world need to flee to this wilderness location within hours of the abomination of desolation, how will they get there? How will they know where to go? How will they survive the journey? Human planning couldn't orchestrate such a massive evacuation, but divine intervention could. Just like God guided Israel through the wilderness with a pillar of cloud and fire, just like He transported Philip supernaturally from Gaza to Azotus, just like He provided for Elijah's needs through ravens and angels, God will guide, transport, and provide for the tribulation refugees in ways that defy natural explanation. The wilderness becomes more than a hiding place. It becomes a miracle zone where God's supernatural power sustains life in impossible circumstances. And here's the most important detail of all. Where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time. Not just sheltered, not just hidden, nourished. Just like God fed Israel with manna for 40 years, just like He brought water from rocks and kept their clothing from wearing out, He will supernaturally provide everything needed for survival in the wilderness refuge: food, water, shelter, protection, healing, guidance, all provided miraculously for 1,260 days. The place God has prepared won't just be a barren hideout where people struggle to survive. It will be a supernatural sanctuary where divine provision makes thriving possible even in the world's darkest hour. But you have to get there first, and you have to be there when the wings of the great eagle are provided. Because once Satan realizes where the refugees have fled, once he discovers the location of the prepared place, he'll marshal every force at his disposal to destroy it. But that's when the real miracle happens. Revelation 12:15-16. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Even when Satan discovers the refuge and attacks it, the earth itself will supernaturally defend God's people. The wilderness isn't just a place to hide. It's a place where heaven and earth collaborate to preserve the faithful until Christ returns. Discovery 3: Spiritual deception. But the wilderness will be a place of spiritual clarity and divine protection. The world's most dangerous place becomes God's safest place. Discovery 5: The rise of the false prophet and the mark. But why is fleeing so urgent? Why can't believers just stay where they are and try to blend in? Because what the Antichrist establishes after the abomination of desolation isn't just persecution. It's a complete economic and spiritual prison. Revelation 13:11-17 describes the second beast, the false prophet. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth, in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Will you take the mark to survive, or lose everything to remain faithful? This isn't just religious persecution. This is complete economic slavery. No mark, no food. No mark, no shelter. No mark, no medical care. No mark, no participation in society at all. And taking the mark means eternal damnation. Revelation 14:9-11. If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. There's no middle ground, no compromise position, no way to play both sides. You either flee to the wilderness and trust God for provision, or you stay in the system and damn your soul forever. Discovery 6. When refusing the mark means running for your life. And here's what makes the situation absolutely desperate. Once the mark system is implemented, refusing it won't just mean economic hardship. It will mean active persecution and death. Revelation 13:7. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. Make war with the saints. This won't feel like religious persecution. It will look like law enforcement. It will be presented as public safety, national security, and social responsibility. The propaganda will be sophisticated. These people are selfish. They're preventing economic recovery. They're putting everyone at risk by refusing to participate in the new system. They're religious extremists who value their superstitions more than human lives. The entire world will be turned against anyone who refuses the mark, and the technology to hunt down and eliminate refusers will be unlike anything in human history. Facial recognition, biometric tracking, AI-powered surveillance, quantum computing, global databases, satellite monitoring. There will be nowhere to hide in the cities, nowhere to blend in, nowhere to disappear. That's why Jesus said, "Flee to the mountains." That's why the wilderness becomes the only sanctuary. That's why God has prepared a place far from the surveillance grid, far from the economic system, far from the Antichrist's reach. Discovery 7. The wilderness becomes the final sanctuary. But the wilderness isn't just about survival. It's about spiritual purification and preparation for Christ's return. Hosea 2:14-15. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, will bring her into the wilderness, and speak comfort to her. I will give her her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor as a door of hope. She shall sing there as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up from the land of Egypt. The wilderness becomes a place of intimate communion with God, away from the distractions of modern life, away from the deceptions of the Antichrist system, away from the noise and chaos of the collapsing world. Believers will experience God's presence and provision in ways they never could in comfortable circumstances. Revelation 6:9-11 shows us the souls of tribulation, martyrs under the altar, crying out for justice. But those who flee to the wilderness won't just be victims. They'll be witnesses, worshipers, and warriors in the spiritual battle. The first day of fleeing may be the first step of faith you've ever taken. Many people who find themselves in the tribulation will have been nominal Christians, cultural believers, or people who thought they were saved but never truly surrendered their lives to Christ. The crisis will force them to choose genuine faith or eternal destruction. The wilderness becomes the place where authentic faith is forged. So here's the practical question. What exactly should you do the moment you see the abomination of desolation? What's the step-by-step action plan for tribulation survivors? Run. Matthew 24:16-18. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. Don't pack. Don't gather belongings. Don't stop to secure your property or say goodbye to friends. The urgency is absolute, and the danger is immediate. Separate. Revelation 18:4. Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. Gather. Hebrews 10:25. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Find other believers. Form communities of faith in the wilderness places. Survive. Matthew 6:26. Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Trust God for supernatural provision, just like He provided for Israel in the wilderness. Endure. Revelation 2:10. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Some will be martyred. Others will survive until Christ's return. Both are victories if you remain faithful. Discovery 8. The prophetic map. Is Petra the place? But here's the question that could save thousands of lives. Where exactly is this wilderness refuge that God has prepared? Many prophecy scholars believe the answer is Petra, the ancient rock city in southern Jordan. Is Petra where the countdown to Christ's return begins? Consider the evidence. Petra is a natural fortress carved into solid rock cliffs. It has only one narrow entrance that could be easily defended. It has natural water sources and could potentially support a large population. It's in the wilderness, isolated from major population centers and surveillance networks. But most importantly, it may be specifically mentioned in biblical prophecy. Isaiah 16:1-4. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah to the wilderness, to the mount of the daughter of Zion. For it shall be as a wandering bird cast out of the nest. So shall be the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon. Take counsel, execute judgment. Make your shadow like the night in the middle of the day. Hide the outcasts. Do not betray him who escapes. Let my outcasts dwell with you, O Moab. Be a shelter to them from the face of the spoiler. From Selah to the wilderness. Selah means rock in Hebrew, and many scholars believe this refers to Petra. Could God have chosen this ancient city, hidden in the mountains of Jordan, as His prepared place for the final 1,260 days? The logistics would be miraculous, but not impossible for the God who fed Israel with manna for 40 years. Discovery 9. Fleeing isn't failure, it's obedience. But here's what you need to understand. If you find yourself needing to follow these instructions, fleeing to the wilderness isn't a sign of defeat or spiritual failure. It's obedience to Christ's direct commands. Hebrews 11:7. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is run, when God says run. The Christians who fled Jerusalem in 70 AD weren't cowards. They were the only ones wise enough to believe Jesus' warning and act on it. Running from the Antichrist system isn't compromise. It's faithfulness. Staying in the cities, taking the mark, participating in the beast's economy, that would be the real spiritual failure. Because what the tribulation ultimately reveals is the final division of humanity into two groups, and only two groups: those who worship the Lamb and those who worship the beast. not race, not nationality, not economic status, not political affiliation. Worship will divide the world. Revelation 14:1. Then I looked, and behold, a Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. Revelation 13:16. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. 2 marks, 2 allegiances, 2 eternal destinies. Picture the scenes. Mothers clutching children as they flee to mountain hideouts. Believers burying Bibles to preserve God's Word. Small groups gathering in caves to worship the true King while the world bows to the false one. These won't be scenes of defeat. They'll be scenes of victory. Because every person who chooses suffering over the mark, who chooses wilderness over worldliness, who chooses faithfulness over comfort, they're choosing eternal life over eternal death. And here's the glorious climax to this story of flight and refuge. The wilderness experience doesn't end in death or defeat. It ends with the most spectacular rescue in history. The tribulation ends not with surrender, but with the King's return. Revelation 16:16. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew, Armageddon. As the 1,260 days of wilderness refuge near their end, the world's armies will gather for the final battle against God. The Antichrist will marshal every military force on earth for one last desperate attempt to prevent Christ's return. But the wilderness remnant survives and watches the sky split. Revelation 19:11-16. Now I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. And he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. And he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Jesus returns, not in whispers, but in fire. And those who fled to the wilderness, who endured the persecution, who refused the mark, who remained faithful through the darkest period in human history, they get to witness the most glorious moment in human history. The King returns to claim his kingdom. Jesus already told us how to recognize the Antichrist. Over 2,000 years ago, Jesus revealed the truth about a man and the times that he would bring with him. What if I told you that while the world debates who the Antichrist might be, Jesus Christ already gave us his complete profile 2,000 years ago? In this video, I am going to reveal 4 of those traits and what 99% of Christians get wrong. Trait number 1. He will come with an abomination and target Israel specifically. The first sign Jesus gave us is also the most specific. The Antichrist will commit an abomination in Jerusalem, and when this happens, the Jewish people in Judea must flee immediately. Here's exactly what Jesus said. So, when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, notice something crucial about this warning. Jesus doesn't say, when people around the world see this, or when humanity sees this. He specifically says, let those who are in Judea flee. This is a geographically specific warning about a location-specific event targeting a specific people group. But to understand why this is so significant, I need to take you back to one of the most horrific events in Jewish history. Because what Jesus is describing isn't just a future event, it's the repetition of a pattern that's already happened twice. Let me tell you the story of Antiochus Epiphanes, because this story will help you understand exactly what Jesus was warning about. It's 168 BC. A Syrian king named Antiochus Epiphanes controls Jerusalem. The Jewish people are trying to maintain their faith under foreign rule, but Antiochus has a different plan. He wants to Hellenize the entire region, force everyone to adopt Greek culture and religion. So Antiochus does something that outrages the Jewish people beyond words. He marches into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest was allowed to go once a year. He sets up an altar to Zeus. He sacrifices a pig on the sacred altar. And then he erects a statue of Zeus in the temple and demands that everyone worship it. This was an abomination, a deliberate desecration of the holiest place on earth. And the Jewish response was immediate and violent. The Maccabean revolt began, leading to years of warfare until the temple was finally cleansed and rededicated, an event we still celebrate today as Hanukkah. But here's what's prophetically significant about this story. The prophet Daniel had predicted this exact event 400 years before it happened. In Daniel 11:31, he wrote, "His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation." Now, when Jesus refers to the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, he's connecting this future event to that historical pattern. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. Daniel didn't just prophesy about Antiochus, he prophesied about multiple abominations. And Jesus is warning about the final one. In 70 AD, we saw another partial fulfillment when Roman legions destroyed the temple and planted their eagle standards where the Holy of Holies had been. But that wasn't the complete fulfillment Jesus was talking about, because it wasn't followed by the other signs he described. So what is Jesus warning about for the future? He's warning about a time when another world leader will enter a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem and commit an act so blasphemous, so outrageous to God and to the Jewish people, that it will trigger the final countdown to his return. Now, here's where this gets absolutely fascinating from a prophetic standpoint. For this prophecy to be fulfilled, several things have to be in place. There has to be a temple in Jerusalem. There has to be a Jewish presence in the land. There has to be some kind of religious system operating that can be abominated. For 1,878 years, from 70 AD to 1948, this seemed impossible. The Jewish people were scattered around the world. Jerusalem was controlled by foreign powers. There was no temple, no sacrifice, no visible way for this prophecy to be fulfilled. But then, something remarkable happened. In 1948, Israel was reborn as a nation. In 1967, Jerusalem came back under Jewish control for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. And today, for the first time since 70 AD, we have Jewish religious movements actively preparing to rebuild the temple. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has recreated all the vessels, garments, and instruments needed for temple service. They've trained priests in the proper procedures. But there's something else about this first sign that's crucial to understand. And this is where it connects to current events in a way that should get your attention. Jesus specifically warned the people in Judea to flee. Not people around the world, not Christians in general. The people in Judea, which means the Jewish people living in Israel. Why is this targeting so specific? Because the Antichrist's hatred isn't random, it's focused. Throughout history, Satan has tried to destroy the Jewish people because he knows that God's prophetic plan runs through Israel. If he can eliminate the Jewish people, he can prevent God's promises from being fulfilled. We've seen this pattern repeatedly. Pharaoh tried to destroy the Hebrews in Egypt. Haman tried to eliminate them in Persia. Antiochus tried to eradicate their religion. And the Antichrist will make one last attempt. But here's what makes this final attempt different from all the others. And this is something that leads directly to our second sign. The abomination won't just trigger persecution of the Jewish people. It will trigger something far worse. Sign number 2. His rule will lead to the Great Tribulation. The second sign Jesus gave us is the most sobering. The Antichrist's rule will trigger a period of suffering unlike anything in human history. Here's exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 24:21. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. Let me help you understand the magnitude of what Jesus is describing here. He's not talking about a regional conflict. He's not talking about a natural disaster. He's not talking about a war between nations. He's talking about a period of global catastrophe that will be worse than every tragedy in human history combined. Think about that for a moment. Jesus is saying this period will be worse than the flood that destroyed the ancient world, worse than the plagues that devastated Egypt, worse than the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, worse than the Black Death that killed a third of Europe, worse than World War I with its 17 million deaths, worse than World War II with its 75 million casualties, worse than any natural disaster. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. Jesus is speaking as someone who knows all of history, past, present, and future. When he says this will be unprecedented, he's comparing it to everything that has ever happened and everything that ever will happen. And he's saying this period will be unique in its horror. Now, you might be wondering, how could anything be worse than what we've already seen? That's exactly what I wondered until I started studying what the Bible says will actually happen during this time. Let me paint you a picture of what Jesus and the other prophets described, because once you see the scope of what's coming, you'll understand why no period in history even comes close. During the Great Tribulation, the Bible tells us that a third of all vegetation will be burned up. A third of the sea will turn to blood. A third of all sea creatures will die. The sun will scorch people with intense heat. Darkness will cover the earth. Hail weighing 100 pounds will fall from the sky. Earthquakes will be so severe that every mountain and island will be moved from its place. But that's just the environmental devastation. The human cost will be even more staggering. The book of Revelation tells us that during this period, supernatural beings will be released to torment humanity for 5 months, with pain so severe that people will seek death but won't be able to die. Demonic armies numbering 200 million will kill a third of mankind. The seas will become like the blood of a dead person. Rivers and springs will turn to blood. And overseeing all of this will be the Antichrist, wielding power unlike any dictator in history. But here's what I want you to understand about the connection between the Antichrist and the Great Tribulation, because this is crucial. The Great Tribulation isn't just a period of general chaos. It's the direct result of the Antichrist's rebellion against God and his persecution of God's people. The book of Revelation tells us that the Antichrist will be given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. He will control global commerce through a mark system where no one can buy or sell without his approval. He will demand worship as God, and he will wage war against anyone who refuses to submit. But here's what makes this different from every other dictatorship in history. And this is where modern technology becomes prophetically significant. For the first time in human history, the technology exists for one person to actually control the entire global population. Think about what we have today that no previous generation has ever had. We have global communication systems that can reach every person on Earth instantly. We have surveillance technology that can track every movement, every transaction, every communication. We have digital currency systems that could eliminate cash and control all economic activity. We have artificial intelligence that could monitor and analyze the behavior of billions of people simultaneously. We have, for the first time in history, the technological infrastructure for the kind of global control that the Bible prophesies the Antichrist will wield. But here's what's truly chilling about this from a prophetic perspective. The Bible tells us that the Antichrist's control won't just be political and economic. It will be religious. Revelation 13:8 says that all inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life. This isn't just about controlling behavior. This is about controlling belief, about demanding not just compliance, but worship. And we're seeing the foundation for this being laid as well. Traditional Christianity is being marginalized in many parts of the world. Biblical values are being labeled as hate speech. Religious freedom is being redefined as freedom from religion rather than freedom of religion. At the same time, we're seeing the rise of global spirituality movements that emphasize unity over truth, experience over scripture, and human potential over divine sovereignty. These movements are preparing the world to accept a leader who will promise spiritual enlightenment and global unity. But here's what you need to understand about this period, and this is something that leads directly to our third and most hopeful sign. The Great Tribulation isn't just about the Antichrist's power. It's also about God's judgment. The suffering during this period isn't random. It's purposeful. God is using this time to accomplish several things: to judge sin, to purify His people, to demonstrate His power, and to bring about the final salvation of Israel. Which brings us to the third sign Jesus gave us. And this one should fill every believer with hope and confidence, no matter how dark the world becomes. Sign number 3. His rule will be limited. The third sign Jesus gave us is the most encouraging. The Antichrist's rule will be limited by God Himself. Here's exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 24:22. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. This is one of the most hopeful verses in all of prophecy, and here's why. Jesus is telling us that no matter how powerful the Antichrist becomes, no matter how dark the world gets, no matter how hopeless things might seem, God is still in control, and God will intervene to save humanity from total destruction. But let me help you understand the full significance of what Jesus is promising here, because there are layers to this verse that reveal just how sovereign God is over even the darkest period in human history. First, notice that Jesus says, if those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. This implies that the Antichrist's power and the devastation of the Great Tribulation would be so severe that it would lead to human extinction. We're talking about the complete annihilation of the human race. For most of history, this seemed like an exaggeration. How could any ruler, no matter how evil, actually threaten the survival of all humanity? But today, for the first time in history, we have the technology to make that possible. We have nuclear weapons capable of destroying all life on Earth multiple times over. We have biological weapons that could release engineered plagues. We have cyber weapons that could shut down the infrastructure that keeps modern civilization functioning. The Antichrist will have access to all of these technologies and more. But here's the promise: God will intervene. The phrase, "those days will be shortened," is a divine guarantee. It's not a possibility. It's not dependent on human action. It's a sovereign decree from the God who controls all of history. But notice why God will intervene. For the sake of the elect. God's people are the reason God will cut short this period of unprecedented suffering. Even in the darkest hour in human history, God's love for His people will move Him to action. Now, let me show you just how specific God has been about these limitations, because when you see the biblical timeline, you'll understand that God hasn't just promised to limit this period, He's already set the exact duration. In Daniel 9:27, we're told that the Antichrist will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, a period of 7 years in biblical prophecy. But in the middle of that week, he will break the covenant and set up the abomination we discussed earlier. This means the Antichrist's total power will last for exactly 3.5 years. And the Bible gives us multiple confirmations of this time frame. Revelation 13 says, "The beast will be given authority for 42 months. That's exactly 3.5 years. Revelation 12:6 says the woman, representing Israel, will be protected in the wilderness for 1,260 days. That's exactly 3.5 years. Daniel 7:25 says the saints will be given into the Antichrist's hand for a time, times, and half a time. In biblical terminology, that's 1 year plus 2 years plus half a year. Exactly 3.5 years. Do you see the precision here? God hasn't just promised to limit the Antichrist's rule. He's already set the exact duration down to the day. The Antichrist cannot extend his reign by even 1 hour beyond what God has predetermined. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The Bible doesn't just tell us how long the Antichrist's rule will last. It tells us exactly how it will end. And when you understand God's plan for ending this period, you'll see that every detail has been predetermined. The end begins with the Battle of Armageddon. Revelation 16:16 tells us that the kings of the whole world will be gathered to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. This isn't just a battle. It's a trap. God is drawing all of His enemies to one location for final judgment. The Antichrist will think he's gathering the armies of the world to destroy Israel once and for all. He'll surround Jerusalem with forces from every nation. He'll have superior numbers, superior technology, superior firepower. From a human perspective, Israel's destruction will seem certain. But then something will happen that will change everything in an instant. Revelation 19:11 tells us, "I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war." Jesus Christ will return, not as the suffering servant who died on a cross, but as the conquering king who will establish his kingdom on earth. And his victory will be immediate and total. Revelation 19:20 tells us what will happen to the Antichrist. But the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. The two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. No trial, no negotiation, no gradual defeat, instant judgment, and eternal punishment. But here's what I want you to understand about this ending, because it reveals something crucial about God's character. The same God who allows the Antichrist to rise to power is the God who will destroy him. The same God who permits the Great Tribulation is the God who will end it. The same God who seems absent during the darkest days of history is the God who will vindicate himself and his people in the end. This should give us tremendous confidence as we watch current events unfold. No matter how powerful evil becomes, no matter how hopeless things might seem, no matter how much the forces of darkness appear to be winning, God's victory is certain. And that victory isn't just future, it's already been accomplished. The cross of Christ guaranteed Satan's defeat. The resurrection of Christ demonstrated God's power over death. The return of Christ will be the final execution of a verdict that was already rendered 2,000 years ago.
Many seem to be confused because they do not understand the book of Revelation. However, what if there was an animation showing the entire book? Well, we created that. And to watch that, click here.